have some fun. Uh, First of all, I should tell you that it's my birthday. And as you can see from the balloons behind me, I am happy to share part of this day with you. So I've been a children's book author for over 20 years. My publisher is Scholastic. And today we're going to focus on my latest book, which is Child of a Dream, a memoir of 1963. So do you know what a memoir is? Well, you'll figure that out a little bit more as we move forward if you're not quite sure what a memoir is. But from the title, you may know a few things, especially if we have any historians out there. I wonder if you can write down 3 key events that happened in the United States in 1963. I'll give you a hint about one of them. Dr. Martin Luther King's famous speech. Child of a Dream is a true story, and it opens on my birthday. So this was my birthday in 1963. I was turning 13 and very worried about becoming a teenager. And that was partly because I had an older brother who started acting out when he became a teenager, and I assumed that would happen to me as well. I was already kind of feisty. I had a horse, and I knew I wasn't supposed to ride my horse without a saddle, but I preferred to ride him bareback. So I got into troubles with Diamond and troubles with my mother. So I share that in my memoir, and I talk about my relationship with Diamond because that's really how I learned about freedom and joy and responsibility, and I gained a lot of confidence, and it helped me. It helped me to feel more confident as a person. This is a cover of my book, Child of a Dream, a memoir of 1963. So as you can see, it has a singular girl on here, and that's supposed to be me, done by this very talented graphic artist. This is my family. This is me when I'm a baby, and that's my brother Jackie and my parents. My parents were always an elegant, loving couple. Now as David has joined us, my younger brother, this is a birthday celebration. And this is, I want to show this slide because another person has joined, my grandmother Zelly, and my grandmother came to live with us when I was 10 years old, and she was one of the most important people in my life. She's the reason partly that, my mother and my grandmother, a reason I became a nurse. She was just an amazing influence on me. This is my best friend Candy. Back then, as you can see, those Madras plaids are very popular. As were those flats we had to wear until our parents gave us permission to put on heels. So this is us when we're 13 years old. So I remember I was telling you about the Children's March. Here's a couple of pictures from the Children's March. There's Dr. King marching with children right in the front there. Here's another picture of the children marching in Birmingham, Alabama. And this is a picture of my dad and Dr. King. So my dad was very important during the movement for a number of reasons. He was an inspiration, so he'd go out and give speeches. He also raised money for the movement, and he went out on marches. So that was the activism that I saw. Whenever there was a crisis, my dad was traveling to the crisis points to help out whenever he could. So this is one of the ways that my father and mother found a way for us to be involved as a family in the movement more generally. I remember this is our home in Stamford, Connecticut, and this is our first of many jazz concerts that we had at our home. And this jazz concert was to raise money for Dr. King. He wasn't able to actually attend this one, but you'll see in 1 minute where he attended a different one. But right there in the front, you see a picture of a young lady playing the flute. That is me. I'm playing with a very famous flutist, Herbie Mann. It's my parents in the background, and my brother David is pretending to play the drums. He's actually looking on and trying to figure out what his sister is doing, playing the flute with Herbie. So this is my family went as a family to the March on Washington. My dad was not one of the primary speakers. However, he stood with Dr. King before the march began and welcomed the marchers and said that he is here with his family as well. So this is actually a picture of David and my younger brother David with my dad once the march has begun. This is a picture, this one is the second jazz concert. So Dr. King, after the March on Washington, asked my dad if he would and Mom, if they would do another jazz concert because they needed money for all those kids and all those people who had been jailed during the march. And so they were actually raising money to help pay for their bail or their legal expenses, the marchers' legal expenses. So it was very exciting as a 13-year-old to actually meet Dr. King and have him come to our house. It couldn't have been more important. One of those most important moments in my life, and I will never forget it. And partly because Dr. King was such a kind, regular person, so he was very comfortable talking to us kids, and he was comfortable walking around and talking to the people in the audience and the musicians. So he just kind of had this easiness about him that made you feel very comfortable around him. And then he gave us this very powerful speech where he warned us, that the movement is, that there was going to be greater losses in the movement, and that we had to continue to fight to end segregation and fight for our freedom. So this is one of my favorite pictures of my dad and I, because as you can see, I was wearing my afro. We were out at a community event in Chicago with Operation Push and Reverend Jesse Jackson, and activism became a part of me. It started when I was 10 years old, but it continued throughout my life. So this is one of my favorite pictures of the two of us together. And I hope now, can we stop for a minute and take a selfie? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my dog, and my dog and I are going to take a selfie with you. This is my puppy, Mimi. So will you take a selfie with us? Hey, Memes, you're taking a picture. Can you see the kids are out there? Okay. Well, thank you. Now, I hope we still have time before we have to separate for you to ask me some questions. Will we still have time?
Yeah, let's ask some questions. Let's see what we've got here. What is the best advice that you could give to this new generation?
The best advice is to understand, try to understand history, understanding history helps you to understand what's happened in the past, what worked, what didn't work, and kind of it gives you something to build off of when you want to become an activist with present issues. And as you'll see, history repeats itself. So whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's the environmental issues, these are not new issues. They just have, a way to, they repeat themselves. Whether it's war, whatever it is, these things repeat. So, by learning history and feeling comfortable with it and reading and really kind of understanding yourself and what's important to you, that's a good place to start.
What did it feel like to grow up with a celebrity in your family?
Well, as you know, Jackie Robinson was my dad, and he was also a very famous baseball player, and later became an activist, or always was an activist, actually. I shouldn't say later. He was an activist even when he was a child. And so I kind of grew up understanding him more as an activist because I was older and saw him in that role. But he was a great dad. So what it means, though, when you're growing up with a famous parent, it means that you kind of share him with the world, and you have to get used to that. So my dad was always very careful to spend lots of time with me. I was his only daughter, and I had a special role in his life. Kind of spend special time with me alone. So the favorite thing my dad and I used to do together. So my dad was working. We lived in Stamford, Connecticut, and my dad was working in New York City. And so he started when I was, probably 6 years old, inviting me to go spend the day with him in New York City. And, so I told you, you grow up like sharing your dad with the world. So you're also sharing your dad with, your mother and your brothers and everybody at home. So on this day, when I would go with my dad into New York City, it was just he and I had his full attention, and we would drive into New York together. Every part of it was an adventure, dressing up to go in with him. And then once we got there, to kind of see his world, because he was working in New York City after he retired from Major League Baseball. And, I got to see his work world. And it was, my dad worked in for a coffee company, and they had businesses like Starbucks today. And so we would start there, and that's really where I began to understand the impact my dad had on others as a baseball player. It was pretty amazing. The people behind, the women that worked for him, the company that worked behind the counters, would tell me these stories of going to baseball games with their family and how exciting my dad was as a baseball player. And I began to get a visual sense of what he meant to people through those visits to Chock-full of Nuts. And then once I became a writer and wanted to tell stories about him, I really studied him in ways that I hadn't before, and understand the baseball years, post-baseball years, and our family better.
That's wonderful. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that research. What was that like, researching your own father?
It's kind of weird and kind of wonderful because, we think, first of all, so much has been written about my father. So I had a lot of sources that a lot of people don't have access to. Many, many books, many magazine articles, and it's quite an experience to begin to understand someone you love so much, but take it away from the personal and really just focus on who was this person beyond being a very important person in my life. Why was he so important to other people, and why was change so important? I'll tell you, when I was Child of a Dream, as I mentioned, it was a very important book for me to write because in 1963, in the midst of my anxieties about becoming a teenager, I also was fascinated by the civil rights movement, and my dad would come home and talk about it at the dining room table. So when it got time for me to write Child of a Dream, I knew this was an important year for myself, for the civil rights movement, for my family, but I didn't know how important it was until I started doing my research. And that research took so many different levels and was so fascinating. I did a lot of research in libraries, in archival libraries. I also did a lot of interviews. I spent time speaking on the phone with people in Birmingham. I actually didn't, I got down there once, but I didn't actually spend time with the people I interviewed until after the book came out. Or at least after the book was written. But what was fascinating to me in 1963 was the Children's March that happened in Birmingham, Alabama. And that's a story I wanted to share with kids, because it was these courageous kids in Birmingham, Alabama, led by Dr. King and all of his cronies at the time and local people, who really sparked the world's attention to the civil rights movement. And the reason why is you see all these children who left their classrooms at noon and marched from a church, the 16th Street Baptist Church. And as they were marching, they were sort of blocked by the police. And, you know, the first day, you know, it was not much tension between the two groups, but by the second day, there was a lot of tension because they were threatening a way of life in Birmingham, Alabama. And even though they were children, they didn't want the people in Birmingham, the police didn't want them to be successful. They didn't want them to reach downtown, which was Birmingham was a very segregated city. And so the way they stopped them was pretty violent. They used dogs. They packed them into off to jail. But the kids used all of Dr. King's nonviolent resistant behavior, and they held together. They when the fire hoses were turned on them, they kind of gathered together, kind of protecting each other from the fire hoses. And I watched it as a child in Stamford, Connecticut, on television with my parents, and I was horrified at what I was seeing, and yet again proud of these young people. But that same horror that I was feeling was reverberated around the world, and there was a lot of pressure on President Kennedy to intervene and to pass the Civil Rights Act, which they had been stalling on for a very long time, so that we could begin to end legal segregation. So it really is this power of these children lifting their voice. And it reminds me a lot of what's been going on today. It's very exciting when you see young people taking on issues of the environment and lifting their voice and be willing to go out on marches and to say this is our world and we want to be able to have it to be safe and environmentally safe for us when we grow up and when we have our own families. And that's so important that if you're passionate about something, that you know how to speak up and stand up for what is right. And sometimes it's not even something you're passionate about. Maybe you're that same voice, lifting your voice, might help you in school. You're having trouble in a class, you can lift your voice there and go to your teacher. And if you don't get help from your teacher, you go to the principal, but you keep on defending yourself because you deserve better.
And what do you think about how students can lift their voice to be heard if they're under 18 and can't vote?
Oh, your voice is still very important. So let's just think about that a minute. So you're under 18, but you're part of a school, you're part of a church community, you're part of a neighborhood. There's lots of ways you can lift your voice. So maybe you're taking some control in your neighborhood. You realize that, some older neighbor is not able to keep their yard up, and you say, what, this is my neighborhood and I want it to be, I want to help my neighbor. Or if it's your church community, you can volunteer to help out with other organizations. There's lots of nonprofits that love having children be volunteers. Or it's your library, or even in your home, you help your mom out, your grandma out, your dad, your uncle, whoever it is in your family that needs support. But the most important thing about lifting your voice if you're under 18 is knowing that school is what is your priority. That is your job now. So we want you to lift your voice in school. If you don't understand something, go up and make sure that you get the attention of your teacher and you get the help you need. If you're excelling in school and you want to run for office in your high school or your junior high school, do it. figure out what, your marketing campaign and become your class president. So don't ever think that your voice is not important. Think back to 1963 and those children that marched and got the attention of the world, and we got the, ultimately we got a year later, the Civil Rights Act was passed.
I have a question about the movie that was made about your father, and if you were happy with the way Chadwick Boseman portrayed him.
Yeah, 42 was a wonderful movie, and we felt very good about it. Chad was a tremendous Jackie Robinson. It was, a breakout role for him, and we got to meet him and spend time with him before the film came out, and then when the film came out, with all of the actors, actually. We even went to the White House. President and Mrs. Obama welcomed us into the White House. Harrison Ford, Chad, and the writer-director, David Hegelin, and the producers. So it was really an amazing experience, the whole process. Sometimes when something is written, produced about you, you don't get as much say about it. But in this case, we did have say, and as a result, we developed some really wonderful friendships, and we were very pleased with the product.
What inspired you to become an author?
So I became an author 25 years ago. I was teaching, and in a university, when you teach, you have to also publish. So I started publishing in nursing and midwifery journals, and then decided to publish, try to do other kind of publications. So I started working in 1997 with Major League Baseball, and we were working with kids on values and overcoming obstacles, and we had a national essay contest. And I just loved the audience, and so I approached Scholastic and asked would they be interested in me writing for them, and that's how I really started with Scholastic. So I've published, maybe 12 books total, and have loved writing. I didn't know when I was a child that I would become a writer. I wanted to be a nurse, and I loved I worked for many years as a nurse, and then started doing other things, including writing books. And that's kind of the interesting thing about life. We don't always know where our path will lead us. And I was excited that it led me into writing. Do any of you like to write? Do you keep journals? Do you write every day, or are you actually writing a book? The one thing I learned about publishing and writing is the more you read, the more you better become as a writer. So I encourage all of you to continue to read a lot and write whenever you can. And journals is a great way to tell your own story and, kind of lift your own voice, kind of work through what's happening in your head. Putting it down on paper.
Wonderful. And just one more question before we say goodbye. Who was your role model growing up?
Wow, it had to be my mom, and that's not an easy role model for me, because she, to me, was perfection. And, and I was always below perfection. So I kept trying to, my dad and I had a wonderful relationship, so he was my everything. But with my mom, she was so beautiful and so elegant, and so, she just always, gave to nonprofits. She kind of was everything you want to be. So the way I started emulating her was also becoming a nurse, And my mom was not a typical nurse. She didn't leave, didn't wear a uniform. And she worked in the more extended roles within nursing. And I did the same thing, only I decided, not to be my mom, but to be myself. So I chose to be a nurse midwife instead of a psychiatric nurse like my mother. But she was always and she continues to be. My mom is now 98, and, she's taught me about aging. She's taught me about life. She's taught me about grief. So, she continues to be my role model. Okay. Well, like I said, I just have really enjoyed sharing this day with you, or part of this day. And, if you want to send me letters, you can reach me directly at letters@SharonRobinsonInc.com. So if anybody has something I'd like to speak to me directly about, please send me a letter. We also want you to link into hashtag Flipgrid for all. I'd like to thank Microsoft and Scholastic and all of you for joining us today. Have a wonderful day, and remember to love yourself and lift your voice whenever possible.